There is a place in the United States most people have never heard of. A stretch of land tucked deep into the high desert of eastern Oregon, far from cities, far from highways, where the nights are so quiet that even your own thoughts feel too loud, and where the land looks empty until you stay long enough to realize it is watching you back. Because towns like this don't announce themselves with signs or welcome boards, they just exist, surviving quietly while the rest of the country moves on without ever knowing they were there. People who live there don't talk much about why the town still exists, especially when other nearby settlements dried up and vanished over the years. But anyone who stays more than a few nights eventually notices the same thing, usually without realizing why it makes their skin crawl. The dogs. They are everywhere, stretched out in the shade of old buildings, sitting at the edges of dirt roads, lying near fences and dry creek beds, never chained, never owned, never chased away, and yet never starving or sick, because in this town, dogs aren't treated like property or pests. They are treated like part of the environment, the way you accept rocks or wind or the horizon itself. During the day, they barely move, lifting their heads only when something passes through town, their eyes following people in a way that feels more observant than curious. But when the sun drops and the desert cools, when the sky turns that deep bruised purple and sound begins to disappear, every single dog stands up as if responding to a signal no human can hear, and they begin to take positions around the town with a quiet coordination that no one ever taught them. Nobody tells them where to go, nobody whistles or calls, and yet they spread out perfectly, some along the dirt roads leading out of town, some near abandoned structures, some sitting just far enough into the desert that you can barely see them unless you know where to look, forming a living boundary that the locals understand without ever needing it explained. People lock their doors early here, not because they are afraid of each other, but because the dogs have already decided the night has begun. Years ago, before people learned to trust them, the town tried living like anywhere else, and that was when the disappearances happened. Not dramatic enough to make national news, not violent enough to leave evidence, just quiet vanishing acts that left behind unfinished dinners, unlocked doors, vehicles parked where they shouldn't have been, and families who knew something was wrong long before they were told officially that there would be no answers. The dogs had barked every time, not frantically, not wildly, but in a deep, steady way that carried across the desert like a warning meant for anyone willing to listen, and the people who ignored it were always the ones who didn't come back. The turning point came one night when the barking didn't stop. Every dog in town gathered at the edge of the desert, standing shoulder to shoulder, growling low and steady as something moved beyond the reach of the headlights and porch lights, something that didn't walk right and didn't move like an animal, something that seemed to hesitate at the line the dogs had drawn, testing it the way water tests a crack. What happened after that was never fully described because language failed anyone who tried, but by morning the dogs returned exhausted, some limping, some bleeding, one missing entirely, and the desert beyond the town was silent in a way it had never been before. After that, nothing else disappeared. That's when the town stopped pretending it was in control. They didn't write rules or hold meetings or put up signs, they just started paying attention. Because it became obvious that the dogs weren't reacting randomly, they were responding to things people either couldn't see or refused to acknowledge, and trusting them became less about belief and more about survival. If a dog blocked your path at night, you turned around, because arguing with it never ended well. If dogs gathered near your house without making a sound, you stayed inside, because silence meant they were listening to something you didn't want to hear. If the dogs barked together, you didn't open doors or windows no matter what you thought you heard calling your name, because everyone eventually learned that the desert was very good at imitating voices. And if the dogs stopped paying attention to someone entirely, if they refused to look at them or sit near them or acknowledge their presence, the town quietly stepped back too, because whatever the dogs were watching for in that person, it was already too late to fix. Outsiders never understood this. They laughed at the idea of animals being guardians. They walked at night. They tried to scare the dogs away, and most of them left shaken but unharmed, chalking the tension up to imagination. But every once in a while, someone stayed long enough to notice that the dogs weren't guarding the town from the desert. They were guarding the desert from something the town was slowly feeding. The dogs weren't hunters. They were containment. The desert didn't want everyone, and the dogs made sure it didn't take more than it was allowed. That's why, after all these years, the town is still there, quietly existing under an endless sky, children growing up learning to read the posture of a dog the way others learn street signs, families sleeping peacefully behind locked doors while paws press into the dirt outside, holding a line no fence ever could. There are no heroes in this story, no final battle, no dramatic victory, just a fragile balance maintained night after night by creatures who never asked for thanks and never needed praise. Because as long as someone listens, as long as someone respects the warning before curiosity turns into hunger, the town survives. And that's the part most people don't find terrifying at all. The truly terrifying part is knowing how many places like this once existed and how few still have dogs willing to stand in the dark and keep watch, so that the rest of us can sleep believing the world is quieter than it really is. But in that forgotten corner of eastern Oregon, as long as the dogs rise when the sun sets, the town wakes up every morning intact, breathing, alive, and grateful in the only way that matters, by listening.
Subscribe for more.